Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and you can catch up with me on Twitter. I am at ILTM Podcast. I'm also on Instagram at I Love That Movie Podcast, and we have a Patreon. The show is always free, but if you want to support us on there, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And I want to take a quick moment to thank our top patrons. They are Jeff Widman, Philip Barker, Michael Krosh, and Josh Johnson. Thank you guys so much for keeping the lights on. And once again, if you do want to join our Patreon, it just gives you a weekly bonus episode of everything else I'm watching besides talking about these great movies that we talk about every week or every 2 weeks. I have a returning guest on my podcast. I have Mark from the Visually Stunning Movie Podcast. Say hi, Mark.
Hi, Mark.
Hello, welcome back. If people are just now hearing you on my show, can you introduce yourself just a little bit?
Yeah, I'm Mark. I'm from the Visually Stunning Movie Podcast. And like Lisa, I am over on Twitter at VS Movie Podcast, or you can go to the website, vsmoviepodcast.com, where we talk all things movie and sometimes TV and a lot of pop culture and a lot of good stuff like that. But yeah, we're everywhere. We love movies, and it's nice to be back. It's such a wonderful place you have here.
Thank you so much for coming back. I know we were going to talk about, or initially you wanted to talk about a couple movies because of a movie that just came out, but we kind of narrowed it down to one. My guest still always picks the movie. In case this is your first time listening, I have my guest choose the movie. So, Mark, what movie did you choose to talk about?
In honor of a film that came out 2 weeks ago, I think at this point, we're going to talk about the 1981 Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell classic, Evil Dead.
Yay. And yes, thank you for your patience. I was putting together my 6-year anniversary podcast, so this kind of got pushed back a little bit, but excited to talk about this today. Evil Dead 1981. I love this movie and I love this franchise.
Yeah, it's great. Now, I told you I had an anecdote, and I'm going to share it with you now. I was like, I love talking about this movie. I will talk about this movie and these movies and Bruce Campbell all the live long day. And I was like, I feel like I've just done this. And a year ago in April, like literally a year and a week ago, I was on the Cultworthy podcast where we discussed The Evil Dead because it's such a cult movie.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were looking for guests, Evil Dead Rise was right on our doorstep. And I was like, well, what better time to talk about? Because I want to talk about Evil Dead Rise, and we will. But we'll talk about Evil Dead. And then it got in my brain, and I'm like, I literally will have talked about these movies 2 years in a row.
Nice. Very cool.
But that just tells you how much I love them.
Yeah, I can see. We talked a little bit off air before we started recording, and you've got some Bruce Campbell paraphernalia I can see behind you. So that's great. I love these movies too. My husband at one point, I don't know if he's still going to do it, but he was entertaining the idea of getting a tattoo that was just his chainsaw that said Groovy, which I fully support. Have really enjoyed this franchise over the years, and Bruce Campbell too, of course.
Yep.
Now, if you haven't seen this movie before, and what's wrong with you? No,
right?
Okay.
No,
okay
don't apologize for that comment. What is wrong with you?
I would pause here and I would go watch it and then come back and join our conversation because we are going to spoil it. I'm not going to do a spoiler free. When we talk about podcasts, we talk about movies, on this podcast, we do spoil them. So
It
Pause
has
here.
been 42 years.
Oh,
Dear
really?
God, that is insane. 81 to 20. That's 42 years.
Oh, you're right. Oh my gosh.
So yeah, you know
Almost
what?
as old,
Spoiler
or I'm
alerts
almost
are
as old
off.
as the movie.
It's been 4 decades.
That's true. You had your time.
You had your shots.
But I'm going to give a very fast synopsis. It's literally a sentence because I don't think the synopsis is the important part of this movie.
Yep.
But essentially, 5 friends travel to a cabin in the woods where they are unknowingly releasing flesh-possessing demons.
Good enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens.
That
This
is exactly what happens.
Directed and written by Sam Raimi, and it stars Bruce Campbell. This is his feature film, like his first film together.
Sam's as well.
Oh, that's right, Sam's
this
too.
Is it. They get childhood buddies, Sam and Bruce.
I know, that's so awesome. I actually had a quick note about that Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell, like you said, they're friends from high school. They made Super 8 films together, and they often collaborate with Ted Raimi as well.
Sam's brother.
Yep. Campbell became the actor of the group, as he was the one that girls wanted to look at, according to Sam Raimi. Campbell has played brief parts and cameos in most of Raimi's movies ever since.
Yes, there's only been 1 or 2 where he does not appear.
I love that. I really like their relationship and how it's like endured after all this time. I just find that so heartwarming.
Yeah, and let's not forget, I actually think that Sam's car has more cameos.
Really?
The movies that Bruce is not in, the car still manages to be in.
I love that. And I just
and that includes that up to and including Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness.
Oh, amazing. That's awesome. I loved that movie too.
There's a rumor that it's actually in The Quick and the Dead.
Oh, really?
Which is a Western. So it would be very hard for an Oldsmobile classic
to worm.
But the rumor is they took the body off and covered it with a covered wagon. So technically it's in the movie, but that can't be there. That cannot be confirmed.
I like that idea anyway. But this was filmed in a real life abandoned cabin, and the property owner granted the production crew to lease the cabin under the condition that any modifications made for the film were to be undone. And so the crew kept their promise. The only thing that remains in the cabin is the fireplace that was built for the film. So I guess that was an exception.
Yeah.
I feel like that speaks more to the low budget of this first film than it does to authenticity, but I like it nonetheless.
If by low you mean no, yeah, I think basically they had no money to make this film. And I mean, and technically it was done in 1979.
Wow.
And they were just shopping it around forever and ever and ever, trying to get it.
A true passion project.
And I believe Europe is where they finally got it. Got a distributor. I believe it was Renaissance, but I could be wrong. But that synopsis doesn't really do the film justice.
There's a lot that happens.
All. Because it's if you wouldn't know better, I mean, it was filmed in 79, but it feels like it feels like a prototypical 80s slasher setup.
It does.
Which is just a bunch of teens drinking and theoretically whoring around.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of some masked psychopath, they accidentally unleash a supernatural force into this plane of existence, and bad things happen.
That's true. Where do you want to start with this? Do you want to talk? And there's not really a whole lot of cast to talk about, right? So
no, it's really not. It's Ash Williams, which is Bruce Campbell.
Mm-hmm.
There's his girlfriend, his friend, a girl they pick up, and Ash's little sister who tags along. But they're all teens, late teens, early 20s, because there's theoretically some of them are in college, so it's kind of a college thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's the cast. And then a voice on a cassette from Professor Nobi, the archaeologist. No, let's just start that. If you haven't seen The Evil Dead, and you've seen, because there was The Evil Dead, then there was Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn,
Mm-hmm.
Then there was Army of Darkness. Then there was Ash versus the Evil Dead TV series, which ran for 3 seasons. There was the 2013 reboot sequel-y kind of thing from director Fede Alvarez, blessed by Raimi and Campbell. And then Evil Dead Rise just came out, written and directed by Lee Cronin, also blessed and executive produced by Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell. So if you've only seen like Army of Darkness, there is a tone to that film that does not match The Evil Dead.
Right.
The Evil Dead is a straight up horror movie with comedic elements.
I was going to say, you're right. I think, Army of Darkness is probably the first thing that I saw. The first movie out of the trilogy that I saw, and I absolutely loved it. But it got there from Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. It was like a progression into that movie, I think, with the humor.
Yeah, well, if Army of Darkness it's a comedy horror, whereas The Evil Dead is a horror, and it's not even a horror comedy. Like Evil Dead 2 is maybe a horror comedy.
That's true.
But The Evil Dead is if you watch it, it's just a straight up horror. It's a low budget horror that gives us and gifts to the world the cabin in the woods trope. And if it didn't invent it, it perfected it.
Yeah.
And it distilled it down to its essence. And that is why I love it. Because yes, Army of Darkness is great, and I love it. I love it to death. I love Evil Dead 2, which ironically is just a more comedic remake, soft reboot of The Evil Dead. Once they got a budget and a distributor, they were able to make more of the movie that Sam wanted to in the first place. And it's, I mean, in the 2013 version is just straight up horror, but it's 2000s horror, which is a completely different animal than 1980 horror or 1990 horror or 2000 horror. So there's a lot of things going on that kind of make The Evil Dead from 1981 different from everything that came after it, because it is a horror that fits its period. But if they made that today, we would have wound up with something with the graphic sensibilities, and I'm about to contradict myself, kind of the graphic sensibilities of the 2013 version, or even Evil Dead Rise. Having said that, The Evil Dead does not shy away from gore or violence or any of that. It's just kind of a different flavor. And so it for all of the, the kind of poo-pooing of the Evil Dead franchise as this kind of slapsticky stuff, people kind of tend to forget that it is firmly rooted in really kind of disturbing and violent horror.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing about it to me is that Sam Raimi is a great director. There's campy, fun elements to this movie, but he's really good at what he does. I mean,
and it's all in service to the horror.
Right. I just think, like, in the hands of another director, yeah, this would be like maybe campy, silly, slapsticky, but I don't think that accurately describes what this is. And I agree that sometimes people, if they've only seen Army of Darkness, they might think that that's where it got its start, but it's really, like you're saying, a lot more nuanced than that.
Yeah, I would actually encourage, mild tangent, if you have not picked up Bruce Campbell's biography, it's called If Chins Could Talk, Confessions of a B-Movie Actor. He spends an inordinate amount of time appreciating the making of this film and discussing a lot of what they did and how Sam specifically did business and how they innovated and adapted and created to do a lot of the things that we look at. If you look at a Sam Raimi horror movie now, you recognize all of those touches that they developed back on The Evil Dead. Obviously you're not going to see them in films like the Costner baseball movie, which just the name escaped me, but I love it to death. Or movies like that, The Quick and the Dead. Even The Quick and the Dead has some of like the camera move influences of this. So, a lot of what people might like about Sam Raimi really is built in this movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it stood the test of time for sure.
It has. I would really love to see this, I think, at a midnight screening. I might have to organize one of those at one of our local theaters, because I think that would be I think that would be a blast with an audience full of people.
Yeah.
Just to sit down and watch. I mean, because you could almost do a double feature of the two, of Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2. And you could do that in 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
Because they're not long.
That's true. They're not. So, a lot of horror isn't. And
so I think that would be fun. But yeah, I mean, if you just want to, don't sit down by yourself, have a couple of your friends with similar sensibilities sit down with you if you haven't already watched it, or if you haven't watched it in a while. But yeah, no, it occupies a weird place in its own franchise, much less in like the horror pantheon.
That's an interesting observation that I hadn't thought about, honestly.
But I mean, but that happens with a lot of franchise. But normally the outlier kind of occurs later.
I agree. Yeah.
But there is no Evil Dead 2, obviously, if they don't eventually sell Evil Dead. There's no Army of Darkness. Bruce Campbell doesn't really exist as an actor without this film. So you have to stop and think about that. I mean, what else has he? I mean, he's been everywhere. If you look, he's everywhere.
Yeah.
But he's not a movie star per se.
No, I mean, he's got like the leading man look for sure. And I think that's part of the humor in some of the later ones, especially. But
yeah, and what's awesome is if you watch him in the not Evil Dead stuff, and even in some parts of the franchise, I always I like to remind people that Bruce Campbell can act.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like legitimately, not horror movie acting. He can act. So the fact that we have him, I mean, there's a lot of actors out there that can act that never, hit, quote unquote, hit it big. He's one of the ones that maybe if Evil Dead hadn't taken off, he might have found a role and been, a solid mid-level Hollywood guy forever and ever and ever. But I think in the end, if we have to stop and look at this, I think he's kind of even transcended that. I think he came out ahead in this whole career deal.
Well, I think, as much as we're crediting Sam Raimi here, I think John Campbell's a big part of why this franchise is so successful too. Yeah, I mean, the fact, I mean, Bruce talks about it in his book, and Sam's made comments about it. Half of the Evil Dead success is that, or Bruce actually said it. Sam's theory was always, how much pain can I inflict on Bruce? And if you watch those scenes, but it's also, it's not what Sam does to Bruce, it's what Bruce is willing to do to get the shot. And if you watch Bruce's physical comedy, it's amazing. What he's able to do facially and just physically, his motions, his movements, and everything else. And then Sam would push him and ask him to do things more and more and more. And so between the two of them, they found this really nice creative balance in this little pocket universe that we call the Evil Dead. Yeah.
And the fact that they're friends, I don't think it works if they weren't friends first.
Oh yeah.
I don't think you luck into that.
Each other.
Really.
Yeah. Because the shooting of this was pretty grueling too. So.
Yes. Everyone was miserable. It was cold. There was, like nothing to eat. I mean, they were staying in the cabin.
Yeah.
With, no power, no heat, nothing. Just out in the backwoods of Tennessee, I believe.
Yes, Tennessee.
So if I recall, yeah. So I mean, it was a nightmarish shoot, and then to do all the things that they would do with the makeup and what's great is if you look back at, I love to look back at movies and acknowledge what is wrong with them, and then immediately discount it because I don't care. Because I mean, if you look at scenes, it's great because when his girlfriend is possessed, her face is made up with the demon makeup, but like everything like from her chin and jawline down is perfectly normal. They like it's literally it's like a kabuki mask of demonic possession. And just little stuff like that. You look and you're like, yeah, that's their budget. It's like literally you're stretching makeup that far. And they didn't need to, it didn't matter because the point, again, you get the point across. And I love movies. I mean, I've said this not just on this movie, you know, I'll watch a science fiction movie and yes, the effects might be garbage and, you know, the costume might be crap. It's like, but if I like your idea, if I like where you're going, I'm willing to forgive a lot.
Oh,
but
same.
if it's just garbage across the board, then yeah, I'm going to hammer you for your garbage makeup and your garbage special effects. But if it's like, yeah, but your script idea, it's really pretty good. I like, you know, that nugget of what you're doing. I like where your head's at. So I'm willing to go along with that to see what you're going to do with it. And I'll just discount all the other stuff.
No, I completely agree with that.
And so the Evil Dead, yeah, terrible shoot, you know, terrible conditions. And then again, it took them forever to get it anywhere. And that's, again, the love of the genre, and I'm sure they were working on other stuff, you know, as much as they could after that. But yeah, this was a lot of stuff. And if you stop and think about it, I told you I talked about this just a year ago, and I went back and I listened to that, and I was like, man, I'm just brilliant, because you know we were talking. It's like, you know, what other horror franchise really that from top to bottom has not sucked?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Find one that just there isn't that lull, or where it's just exploitative, you know, name rubber stamping. You know, Friday the 13th, nope, there's garbage there. Hellraiser, nope, there's garbage there. You know, Nightmare, there's garbage in there. You know, and we're racking our brains, and I was like, maybe, and I would have to go back and rewatch the films. I was like, maybe the Phantasm franchise, because I remember the first one, and that first one was just frightening. But it's like, I don't know that they actually just ever became exploitive or suck. Now I might have to go back and rewatch them, but it's like Evil Dead. It's like, no, there's none that suck. They're all true to the concept. They never deviate from the concept. I mean, even when we get to the 2013 reboot sequel, it literally is almost a replay of the Evil Dead, but you know, but not in such a way as it's just, you know, this is not The Force Awakens to A New Hope. This is, you know, it's its own beast, but all of the pieces are there, and everything, you know, except but again, the Evil Dead doesn't have that much comedy. So the fact that the 2013 version doesn't have a lot of comedy isn't really a stretch. And it's a darn fine film in the horror genre. So again, and then you get the Evil Dead Rise, which, you know, we'll talk about here in a couple minutes. But again, there's no real horror franchise that just doesn't have that kind of either one or multiple films where it just kind of loses it, where it's no longer what it is. I think even Scream, like, people weren't real happy with Scream 4 or Scream 3, you know, and Scream 5 was pretty good. Scream 6 was pretty good, but I don't even know that Scream's got more pop culture cred, I guess, maybe. But again, because it started with Wes Craven, who cut his teeth. So it's not like it was some nobody that came in. But Evil Dead is kind of, it's surviving, you know, now we're on our third writer-director between Sam Raimi, Fede Alvarez, and now Lee Cronin. And it's still working. So it's an interesting beast in terms of its cinema place. In that regard. And I think because of that, you can't really overlook any of them. Because I mean, much like I always, it's, people are like, what's the best Marvel movie? And they're like, Iron Man. I'm like, no, I can't count Iron Man because it doesn't count, because without Iron Man, nothing else happens. Well, without Evil Dead, nothing else happens. And a lot of other things outside of Evil Dead probably don't happen.
Yeah. I mean, think about like, there's like comic books, there's all kinds of stuff too.
Well, what it does, its DNA kind of runs out, but then, we turn around and you wind up with JJ, we wind up with The Cabin in the Woods, which is a postmodern deconstruction of the entire genre, tracked back to the Cabin in the Woods trope.
Yeah,
from Evil Dead.
That's true.
So it's so important that, well, I say current cinema, really it's kind of old at this point, but current cinema is analyzing it in current cinema. So, I mean, no one's doing that with Scream. I mean, Scream's doing the entire genre, but it's doing it in kind of a tongue-in-cheek way. So it's, like I said, Evil Dead's just in this weird place where I think it often gets overlooked, except for the fact, I think, that Bruce Campbell is such a kind of bombastic personality. And once the fandom recognized Evil Dead and appreciated it in the way that fandom does, I think he embraced that.
Yeah.
And so now it's become this really kind of true grassroots give and take, because he loves it. I mean, I hate actors that I don't think any actor should ever be typecast. But I think Bruce, he knows what side his bread is buttered on, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I don't, and last year we were when I was talking about we were talking, because Evil Dead Rise was still just a rumor that might come out sometime last year at this point, at that point. So we're talking about it's like, and people were worried. And I'm like, I'm not real worried, because it's got Sam and Bruce's endorsement and their names on it. And from what I know about Bruce and his fans, he would not associate, he might not be able to stop something that was garbage. And I don't know how that would happen, but I'm sure it could happen. But he wouldn't associate with something, I think, that he felt wasn't up to snuff.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And I think that's important. He more so than Sam, I think he kind of maybe considers himself the custodian of Evil Dead.
I could see that, because I feel like Sam, it can exist so much outside of just this franchise. I mean, he's done other stuff like, Spider-Man and and so like he has more to his catalog, whereas Bruce Campbell, I mean, to your point, like, great actor, can do good work, but I mean, I do feel like he knows that a lot of his fame comes from this franchise, and he fully embraces that. So in a lot of ways, he is kind of like the face of that brand.
Yeah, he is. And I don't want to downplay anything Bruce Campbell has done after that.
Oh no, I love Burn Notice, by the way.
Burn Notice.
I love that show.
I mean, he steals every scene he's in that show.
Oh, absolutely.
That show, I think, honestly, on paper, it's one of those shows that shouldn't work.
I agree.
And it only works because of the people in it. I think if you swap out any particular actor, I don't know that film or that show works as well as it does.
Didn't really want to watch that show, but then Bruce Campbell's in it, and so I gave it a chance, and I was like, the trailers made this show look dumb, and maybe it is, but I find myself going back to it over and over and really enjoying it. So I agree with you.
It's all on my shelf behind me.
Nice.
I love physical media. It's on my shelf. If I don't have to go looking for it if I ever get the urge to binge that. So, but yeah, his performance in that is great. And he's not playing Ash.
No, exactly.
It is a solid recurring, and in many instances almost co-starring role.
Yeah.
In that show. And again, I think he kind of got lucky on that, because it again, on paper, I don't know that show's supposed to work. as well as it works. But it does. It's just one of those things where they got the right people, and they took away Gabrielle Anwar's Irish accent after the pilot. That was the
I noticed
that was the other important change, because that was pretty terrible.
It was bad.
It was not good.
It wasn't working.
No. So and I love that she just said, nah, we're in America. We're in Miami, so I need to sound like I'm American. So I was like, yes, thank God. Good choice. But yeah, so it's Bruce considers himself the guardian, and I think that's important. I think the closest equivalent maybe is Tom Cruise and Top Gun, even more so than Mission Impossible. But Top Gun's only had 2 movies.
True.
But he fought to make that second movie right.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's cool to not, you're not typecasting yourself. You're protecting something precious to you, because it's precious to your fans. And I think that's great, because, he could have gone, Bruce Campbell could have just gone and just tried to work continuously forever on other stuff and not worried about the, and just kind of let that fandom simmer.
Yeah.
But he never did. And I think that's an important thing to recognize, in terms of the longevity of the film, is that it's always been out there, and it's always been supported, and it's always been loved by the face of it. And I think that's one of the things that kind of endears me to it, because every time you watch it, you're like, yeah, he was miserable and having the time of his life, because he was making movies with his friends.
Yeah. I will say, out of the 3, like the original 3, I've probably seen this one the least, if I'm honest. But I see everything that you're saying about it, about how it set the tone for future Raimi movies. A lot of the innovation, a lot of the shots. I was wondering, do you want to talk about some of those, like, specific moments that you see echoes of in, like, other Raimi films?
Well, a lot of the camera work is great. What they call the shaky cam,
yes,
which is that
I was hoping you were going to mention that.
That low, it's those tracking shots, those low running shots through the woods, and where the camera's literally shaking. They built a rig to do that. That's being hauled around by 2 guys, with a camera mounted to a 2x4 between them, and that's how they're going through that.
I also like how, I don't know, there's this thing that Sam Raimi does that you've kind of touched on before, where it's like you said, it's a true horror, but he also recognizes that there are moments of humor, and he knows when to use them. And there's some shaky cam stuff in the, like, I guess in the forest, where I feel like I want to pretend that he just shot it, and then he watched it and he giggled a little bit, and then he uses that joke later, like in the second film, more so and more obviously. But I like the way that it sort of sneaks up on you and then kind of makes you laugh when you realize that he's conscious of it too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it is. It's the little head, the little chin thrust there,
Yeah.
like, I got you.
I like that.
But the other one that's huge, and you watch it, it really was one of the things that I was really excited to see when he did the Multiverse of Madness, was that patented, that sweeping push in close-ups that he does.
Yes.
They're almost high altitude, dive bomb into someone's face, and then that quick pull out, and the camera twists at the same time. And those started showing up in Multiverse of Madness, and I was like, man, this is such an Evil Dead movie.
I thought that too. Yeah.
But there's just little flourishes like that, and then the fact that Dead Strange moves like possessed Ash. I swear to God, I was like, please, somewhere someone's eventually going to admit that Sam told Benedict Cumberbatch to go talk to Bruce about how to do that. Yeah, because it's just spot on. Possessed Ash, and I'm just like, oh, it's so good. But you just those little things that make horror a little more horrific, but they're not clean, so they can be considered a little funny looking.
Yeah.
So it is this weird balance, and I'll bet Sam's probably got this really just wackadoodle sense of humor.
Yes.
If we really got to know him, and I hope to God I'm going to an event in Denver, and he's going to be there, and I hope to God I can get 30
He's coming to
seconds
Dallas in a few weeks too.
He is, and if I was going to Dallas, I would be seeing him. But he's also going to Denver, which is right over the mountain for me. So we're going to, so I'm really excited to see him and get him, I'm going to get a photo with him. I'm going to find something for him to sign. I'm sure I have something he could sign, but,
a few things.
But I would love to, I actually reached out to the event planners. I'm like, hey, let me, if you need panel moderators, like guest moderators, let me know. Cause I've done that. And it's like, oh God, that would just be I would just fanboy all over him. But his style is there, and you can see it does creep through. I mean, even in like I mentioned earlier, Quick and the Dead, when we were talking about the car, he does a lot of low and then up sweep into close-ups on a lot of, it's almost old Western, but it's got that Raimi twist.
And like you said, there's something very modern about it too.
Yeah.
Like I feel like by the early 2000s, you had all this like almost like music video stylized fisheye lens stuff that really feels like it originated here.
Yeah, but a lot of, if you watch a lot of horror, there's a lot of steady cam. There's not. I mean, I love Robert Rodriguez does a lot of handheld, and it in horror specifically, it adds a lot of uncertainty, and that's half of a good horror.
Yeah.
Because you can't perfectly frame a handheld running terrifying shot.
Right.
You just can't do it. So, I mean, it's similar to a favorite series of mine, actually, Firefly, when they were talking about shooting stuff in space. The camera moves a lot and is twisting. So a lot of times you'll come in right after an action has happened, and you just have to figure out what happened in space by what's left or what's going on now. And so horror, that lends itself to the horror genre, I think, very well as well. I mean, it's one of those things that, don't show everything. And if you do show it, it doesn't necessarily have to be crystal clear.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, there's a reason why a lot of directors, their first movie is a horror, because it thrives so much on creativity and sometimes on constraints. And I think, like the budget constraints and other constraints of this movie led to a lot of innovation that Raimi did and pioneered and is enjoyed in his future films.
Yeah, and horror is also a film, or is also a genre where you can get away with being formulaic.
Oh, that's true.
So then it's a coloring book, but how you play in those lines and where you choose to break the line is important.
That's true. Yeah.
So but there are constraints inherent in the genre that kind of can keep you as a smaller filmmaker on track and on task. So you're right. That's probably why that's probably why there are so many low budget horror movies.
Yeah, and they're fun, and I feel like there's an element.
They can be fun. They can be fun. Some of them can be garbage
as well. Yeah, I think there's an element to low budget horror that, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I can do what Sam Raimi does, because I don't believe that. But I think that what's fun about like a low budget horror is it does very much feel like a group of friends making a movie together, which is essentially what happened here. And there's like an energy to that the audience just really enjoys. It almost makes you feel like I could have been there and I could have filmed it with them. At least that's how I feel when I watch movies like this.
Yeah. And I think that's very important to any filmmaker. But again, these early Raimi films it was so, they built up to Evil Dead. Just happened to be the one that we got to get them to break through. But it is, and I think it only ages better. I think you look back and, like I said, you look at the makeup. You can poke holes in things, but as a whole, that movie is really pretty perfect.
Yeah, I think. You talked about it a little bit about his sense of humor and how wacky it is. there's a sense of fun, even though the gore is, I mean, it's gory, right? The
Oh, it's
kills
copious.
are very gory, but they're like fun gory to where if you're a horror fan, you're like really enjoying those scenes. And like, I think the actors are sort of like chewing the scenes with how over the top stuff is. But it's just, I don't know, it just hits all the right sweet spots for sure.
Yeah, it does. And again, a lot of their humor sensibilities come from they both loved, Sam and Bruce both loved the Three Stooges. So a lot of their slapstick is very influenced and or cribbed from the Three Stooges. So that physical comedy, because the Three Stooges is just a ton of physical comedy. And again, if you check the credits of most Sam Raimi, Bruce Campbell collaborations, and even a lot of just other movies, you'll see there's a credit for the fake Shemp, which is a method that the Three Stooges used after Shemp died, and they had to keep work. I mean, so they were plugging in bad body doubles for Shemp for things. So it just kind of became the fake Shemp. So like the headless wife, oh god, her name just dropped out of my head, from Evil Dead. There's the Professor Nobi and his wife. When she runs around without her head, that's a body with clearly a built up shoulders and neck. So, but yeah, that's a fake Shemp. That's how it's credited. Played by Ted Raimi, by the way.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah, so it's great. So their comedic sensibilities are old school.
Yeah,
and their horror sensibilities are really new school. They weren't almost ahead of their time in just the amount of, I mean, blood and gore.
Yeah.
And the way they put them together. I mean, and then perhaps one of the most infamous horror scenes in cinema, the tree rape, which is still horrific, and people hate it, and yet the film doesn't work without it, and it's done in such a way that you feel every horrific moment of it, even though it doesn't really last long. And they kind of replicate that in the 2013 version. In Evil Dead Rise, they don't go all the way there, but they invoke the imagery that leads up to it. And so there's that hat tip to the original in the new version, or in the new film. So, and a couple other ones that are a little more blatant, but I actually thought they were going to go there in the new one. Actually, it's like, because they started, I was like, oh my god, this is that scene.
Yeah,
it's like, but that doesn't, and then they it's there, but it's like they never go all the way there, but the lead up is there, and you're just, because and if you're familiar with the franchise, you're like, oh my god. Yeah. So again, the fact that you don't see it, or it doesn't actually happen, is almost a relief. You're almost more horrified leading up to it, because they invoke it. So I mean, again, there's a lot of imagery in this first one. Forget the camera techniques and stuff. Sam committed. You could, but really, could you do it now? I mean, 2013, they did it, but now it's like, I don't know really that you can. I don't know that a studio would actually let you get away with it. Yeah. Which is weird, considering some of the other stuff they do let you get away with, and keep just an R rating. So it is, again, so sensibilities keep evolving. So you can have a lot more violence, like explicit violence, now than you could back then. But so again, it's a weird evolution of the horror genre, but I think the Evil Dead still fits. Yeah.
I think, when it comes to that subject matter you're referring to, I think there's a genuine and general, so both, I guess, concern about treating certain subject matter the right way. And I think a lot of times studios are kind of like, let's just not.
They'd rather not try to address it, quote unquote,
Right.
the right way. They just ignore,
Yeah.
and that's not the only subject, to be fair.
Oh, of course not.
So,
But I
yeah,
think like there's
avoidance
a
is a tactic.
right, and I understand it, especially when, I do think that certain scenes deserve sort of like a trigger warning, right? Because it can lead people to have like real emotional um damage and reactions to it. So I kind of understand that. Whereas like I think the gore in this film is more like, I mean, it's not super realistic, right? Like the deadites are not like realistic. So
No,
I think that's why it's easier to tackle those things and not so much other things. But it's definitely like of its time, and you kind of, if you watch this, you have to know that it was a movie made 1981 versus a movie made now.
right.
And I think enough like true elements of Sam Raimi films have aged so well, like we're talking about, to where they're consistent, that I think it's not too missed or anything. It's not like people go back and go, oh, well, I wanted them to have this or have that. Like I think he stayed, I think, very true to who he is as a filmmaker. And so we have that to look forward to in all his movies.
Yeah. I mean that was a very specific instance, but like I said,
Yeah.
with the new version, it invokes it, but
There's a
not.
way to like
Yeah,
invoke it without having to deal
right.
with the
So,
ramifications of, yeah,
but again,
makes total sense.
it's, and I don't know if you've seen Evil Dead Rise yet.
I have not.
Oh, okay.
I know. I need to
So
get to
again,
this. You're like convincing me. I was like,
I
I
love
don't
the Evil
know if
Dead.
I want to see it or.
So yeah, everyone was concerned that the Evil Dead Rise takes place
Mhm.
in an LA apartment building.
Yeah, yeah, it did seem like it was getting further away to me, but like hearing your insight about it definitely helps sell it for me.
There's a weird framing mechanism in this film that feels like a head fake, the
Mhm.
way the film opens, and then we wind up in the apartment building,
Mhm.
and then the film progresses from there.
Okay.
They explain how there's a book, there's a recording, there's possession, so all of the elements of Evil Dead
Mm.
are there, and why they're there is explained.
Okay.
I have to say that I watched when the first teaser trailer came out. I don't watch. I try not to watch trailers, just as a general rule at this point. But
No.
I broke my rule because it was Evil Dead. I was like, no, I'm baked in. They really can't screw this up for me. So there's a scene in that trailer with the cheese grater.
Yes.
Which I need to go back and watch that trailer again. I feel like I'm remembering it worse than it is in the film.
That happens sometimes though.
So I don't
things like get
know.
clipped,
And again, it could be the way it was cut. My brain went a place that the images don't actually go.
Oh, gotcha. That is sometimes worse than what's actually seen. So
right. So in the film, it felt, I want to say, disappointing, and that feels weird when you're talking about the cheese grater. Visually disappointing. We'll do it that way. So it was a little underwhelmed. I was like, I remember it being worse than that. But again, I don't know if it's my memory or if there's a cut and then they cleaned it up. Maybe they were like, yeah, you know what? Maybe that's too much. I don't know how they could have gotten to that with everything else that's going on, but maybe. But again, I need to go back and rewatch the trailer footage. So it's just to see if it's my brain or if it is actually worse than that teaser footage. But and then it ends. So the film's got Easter eggs for you.
Okay.
It has a couple of overt fan service moments. One of which is too long.
Okay. That's fair.
They do it, and I was like, there it is, and then they do it. I mean, literally and it's only like 10 or 15 seconds, but it's like you needed to do it once.
Got it.
And then they did it, and I was like, see, that's just a bad directorial choice. Like, just cut the rest of that. You literally don't need it. Now it feels like you're fan servicing.
Yeah. I think that was my fear too. I like that you touched on that because I was worried about that, but I'm glad to hear it's not like the whole
No,
movie is
it's this is not okay, right? Here's my second Star Wars reference thing. This is not the Rise of Skywalker fan service. This is no. There are things in there that if you've watched the other films, you may catch that have no bearing on the movie that you're watching or understanding the movie that you're watching. Everything that you need to understand this movie is in this movie.
Okay.
But you will see things that if you catch them, you will be like, oh, there it is. The Leonardo meme, so, but yeah, so it's a nice balance. Like I said, one time he overcommitted. And then it moves on. And I was like, and you'll know it when you see it. You'll know it when you see it. You'll be like, yeah, that's what he was talking about. But yeah, but other than I enjoyed it. I'll own it when it comes out, and it will go on my shelf, and I will be a happy person. So
well, that's good to hear.
I was happy with it, and it leaves the door open, as they always do. It's not a horror movie if you don't leave the door open.
100%.
But it does. But then the film does wrap up, and close the loop, if you will.
Oh, yay! Okay, so, well, I'm sold.
Yeah, it's definitely worth seeing.
Okay, I'm going to see it now. I'm convinced. You've done it.
Let me know what you think.
I will. I'll circle back to you. What was there anything else about Evil Dead, the original, though, that we haven't talked about yet that you wanted to cover?
That we haven't talked about? No, I don't. No. Honestly, I don't think there is. I think it's one of those things. Like I said, and they effectively rebooted it in for 2. It's a sequel. It continues the story while changing the first movie.
Yeah.
In ways that don't actually matter.
Yeah.
Even though you look at it and you're like, my God, they got rid of X, Y, and Z. And it's like, yeah, but you know what? It doesn't actually matter for what's happening. So it's a very weird retcon.
Yeah.
That actually has no bearing. So it's like, it's just a weird situation. But no, the first movie, like I said, for all of the little holes that you can poke in it, it's effectively a perfect horror movie.
Yeah.
From 1981. And you see a lot of it. And like I said, if you've seen any other Sam Raimi movies, you'll recognize a bunch of the things that he does.
Yeah.
From this movie. And I think it's not often that horror sensibilities move out.
Yeah.
But they did in a lot of ways. And I think that's maybe one of its lasting legacies, besides giving us Bruce Campbell.
I was actually about to ask you, because I always ask 2 questions at the end about like what keeps you coming back to this movie, but you already just summarized it really well, I think.
I try.
Yeah, good job. I think why do I keep coming back to this movie? Like I said, I think out of the 3, I probably haven't seen it as much as the other 2, but I keep coming back to this trilogy and to this movie in general because it's just a good film. I mean, it's a good horror movie. Like you said.
It's just really solid.
How would you pitch it to someone that maybe hasn't seen this franchise before? Like, how do you sell this movie to them?
How do you sell this? Well, it depends. Are you selling it to a horror person that somehow hasn't seen it, or someone that's not a horror person? Because I think if you want to sell this franchise to a non-horror person, you have to sell them on Army of Darkness.
True.
Or even Evil Dead 2, Dead by Dawn.
Evil Dead 2 a little bit too. But yeah, this one is more pure horror.
Yeah, this one is more pure horror. So I think if you're selling it to a horror fan, you just have to go, look, you've missed it, and it is a hole in your horror resume.
Right.
And that you need to fill. As a horror fan, you need to fill this hole. If you're not a horror fan, you can sell it, are you a fan of the scary movies? And then you show them Army of Darkness, which this is, that's way better than any scary movie franchise movie. But, you can sell them that, you can, if they like Scream, because but even then that's kind of horror, but it's meta horror. So they might that might appeal to them in that way. Then you almost want to go, look, watch Army of Darkness, then go back and watch 1 and 2. And then you see the buildup to what Army of Darkness is, and you kind of reverse engineer them into it.
it's kind of hard to find somebody that loves film that hasn't seen these movies.
At
So
least
it's not
one
a
of them.
yeah, it's not a conversation that comes up often, but I will say from personal experience, I was when I was a lot younger, I think I was a teenager and I was dating a guy that loved these movies, and I remember him quoting it, telling me about it, and he was just so excited. I didn't feel like I was being, like sometimes when somebody loves something a lot and they're sort of being a little gatekeepy about it, it can feel bad, kind of like,
Right.
oh, you don't know about this. But he was just genuinely excited to show me, like almost like I'm jealous of you because you haven't seen it yet.
Yeah,
And
you
it,
get to experience it for the first time.
exactly. And we enjoyed it together. And I really just like walked out of that. I saw Army of Darkness first, and I walked away like an Insta fan, and I was like, I get it. I get what you like about this. And then we watched the other ones, and that enthusiasm that I got that day, the first time I saw it, it just hasn't waned at all. And so in some ways, if you haven't seen Evil Dead, I'm kind of jealous. Like I'm kind of jealous of you getting to see this for the first time, but just know that you absolutely should if you haven't yet.
Absolutely.
That's my pitch.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Mark, thank you so much for picking this movie and for your patience in getting to record this podcast.
No worries.
Staying on me. That's a lesson to all of you out there. If you haven't heard back from me, stay on me. Like always, always willing to, carve out some time and talk about such a wonderful movie like this. Where can people find you and where can they listen to your podcast?
Again, anywhere you listen to podcasts, just search for Visually Stunning Movie Podcast and you'll find us. If you go to the website VSMoviePodcast.com, all the written reviews are there. Not everything becomes audio. A huge chunk of the movies I watch get written up and get put there. So, but they'll also link to any audio and video that we have either on our RSS feed or on YouTube, where you can also find us. So, and other than that, you can find us on Facebook and Twitter at VS Movie Podcast.
Okay, great. And I feel like it's only a matter of time till you'll come back and we'll cover more of this franchise or others. So thank you again for coming on.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.